I actually wasn't very interested in squash the first time I picked up a squash racket. I was way too into soccer and other sports and team sports where I was playing with my friends. I was also doing tap dance at that time, which I really didn't agree with. I was not well behaved.
Welcome to another edition of Boast About It. I am here with Nicole Bunyan. Nicole, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Super excited to have you here. How did you get into squash? You're from Victoria, BC, Canada. How did you first get into squash?
Well, my parents play, so I was always around the courts while they were playing, and I actually wasn't very interested in squash the first time I picked up a squash racket. I was way too into soccer and other sports and team sports where I was playing with my friends. I was also doing tap dance at that time, which I really didn't agree with. I was not well behaved. Eventually, I begged my mom to let me stop doing tap dance, and she said, okay, well, you have to pick up something else instead. So apparently I said squash, and then I started playing again. This was at the age of 10 or 11 now with my best friend. We still play together to this day. She went and played at Cornell when I went to go play at Princeton. So we played all throughout juniors and went to school together and everything. And I think that introduction, or that reintroduction together is really what helped make it stick. That plus the coach that we started working with, he made it so fun for us to the game.
So like everything else, it's your parents' fault.
It is. Yeah, I blame a lot on them.
So you must have got pretty good because you went, as you said, to Princeton to play on the team. That must have been a big moment.
Yeah, it was. I didn't start out playing squash with that intention. I wasn't even aware of the whole getting recruited to Ivy League universities thing, which is obviously a lot more prevalent now, because I wasn't really a top junior when I was growing up. I started relatively late. Yeah, probably. I think my first nationals experience was when I was in grade 8, so it's probably about 13 or 14. So whereas most people, when you're coming through the ranks, like they'll be going to World Juniors at that point, the ones that turn pro and are the top recruits. So I was a late bloomer in that respect. I actually never played World Juniors for Canada. I might have my last year, but I broke my right arm, which is a whole nother story. So and I think that actually that's something, not being at the top junior is something that's kind of been hard for me to get over coming into the pros, because I think that if you are a top junior, you learn how to win and you're used to competing on the world stage from the very beginning. And that was a new thing for me to adapt to.
Before we go there, you got into Princeton, so you've got a degree from Princeton. Becoming a squash pro is probably not the most economically effective thing to do out of coming from Princeton. There are other choices. Talk to us about, was that an easy choice, not an easy choice? Did you have other choices? Were you tempted?
I was tempted. I graduated from university and thought, let me maybe go and find a normal job as well, which I did some interviews for. Actually, I majored in biology at Princeton, and the reason being was that I thought I wanted to go and become a doctor. And then I realized that was not really what I wanted to do about halfway through university. And really, my fascination with biology was more to do with human performance and the body itself. So I've kind of steered my career off the squash court into that direction. So not really the natural route. I think my parents were pretty skeptical at first. They're
I can only imagine.
Why don't you go into banking?
You showed them,
law?
They got you into squash, and then you became a squash pro.
Exactly, right? What did you wanted this for me? So I graduated and just moved straight to New York because I thought I'll find something. I actually didn't have a job yet, but I had some interviews lined up, a couple in digital marketing, but then also one interview at a gym, at a personal training studio. And that was actually the one that I ended up going with. So I worked as a personal trainer for a couple of years. And that was actually the best, although alternative, route I could have taken, because that really satisfied that requirement or that need that I had to learn more about the body and coaching and developing those skills, which I'd always been doing on the side growing up. That was my transition out of university. And then I started to play squash a little bit on the side. And I had a couple pretty bad injuries I needed to rehab. So it certainly wasn't a massive entrance to squash. It was very gradual.
And that has remained an important part of your life, this sort of personal training. You've built an app around that. You want to talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's called Squashletic. That's the brand name. And so it's basically training for squash players, focusing mostly on the physical side. There is some technical and mental stuff in there as well, but mostly the physical side, because I think there's so many components that are overlooked, and that's what I enjoy. I love, analyzing the body and coaching people as well. So it's been about 3 or 4 years that I've been working on Squashletic.
So, if you think that maybe your squash movement or squash fitness could benefit, you should check out Squashletic. Squashletic. You should check out Squashletic. So you graduated, you sort of put that aside, you sort of focused on the world tour, and I think you sort of went in and out and back into it again, right?
So I graduated university in 2015,
Yeah.
and like I said, that first year I probably just played a couple of tournaments.
Yeah.
So it was 2015, 2016 season. Then the season after that, I played a handful more, but still wasn't really planning, the year in advance. It was just kind of like, oh, well, this is coming up next month. I guess I'll go there, right? And sometimes entered some tournaments, was on the wait list, and then realized, oh my gosh, I've actually got in, and then had to book a last minute flight to Monaco or something. So yeah, definitely.
Worst things can happen.
I know,
last minute flights to Monaco, which sounds like a surreal thing that happened.
Exactly. Some pretty cool places you do get to go to, like Bermuda. They've hosted us a couple times.
Yeah.
Fantastic one. I think you've been there,
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
for a
yeah,
squash tournament.
For sure.
So yeah, that's always a good time. Yeah, and so kind of gradually ramped my way up, and then eventually stopped doing the in-person personal training at the gym in, I think, 2017 or 2018, just because it got to this point where I couldn't do both well, which I'm really glad that I did, because without that I wouldn't have been able to do Squashletic, which is how I live now. That's how I don't make money from the squash tour. I make money from my job, Squashletic.
Let's do both those things. So let's celebrate you for a moment. Top 50 squash player in the world, right?
That's correct.
You are. I think you've sort of gone a little higher than that, but you're in the sort of 40s basically, which is unbelievable. I know that when I've got on court with you, I get crushed. You just said that you don't make money from going on tour. You make money from the app that you've built. What's that like, trying to live as a non-top 5 squash player? I would imagine it's easier for the top 5 than it is the top 50.
Yeah, well, the prize money is going to be obviously much higher the better you do in the big tournaments.
Yeah.
I'd say for me, my prize money more or less covers expenses. I do have a couple of sponsors now, just very recently. One's from Canada, a big investment company called Richardson Wealth, and so just this past year, I've been able to get some sponsorship with them, which is fantastic. That's the first financial sponsor I've ever had for having been on the tour since 2015 or so. So big thank you to them. But yeah, still though, I was talking about this with a fellow pro a couple months ago about how much money, if you really wanted to do everything, as well as you could, book the flights you want, pay a couple extra nights hotel, because instead of just
be prepped.
Yeah, to be prepared properly. Obviously, there's food, your coaching, your physio. If you're doing it right, you probably have a mental coach, 1 or 2 technical squash coaches, strength and conditioning. Maybe even you've got a nutritionist. So that's a lot of people to pay. And she was saying, well, I could easily blow through 200 grand just for that. And I was like, I mean, that's mental, isn't it? Right? Yeah. So, and if you're not in the top 5, you're obviously not making that. They probably are, right? Close to that. And especially with sponsorships, everyone has their own deals.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, it's mainly about my prize money covering I'd say like the travel expenses. I've been able to do some commentating now over the last year and some emceeing, so that's been helpful as well. And again, nice to develop a different skill, work on the speaking side, which I also wanted to work on. So that's been a nice blessing as well.
Do you have a goal, a ranking goal that you want to get to?
I've actually tried not to focus so much on that in the last year or so. It is the most natural thing that people are going to ask you. That's the first thing they want to know. Like, oh, do you think you can get to top 30, top 20, top 10, whatever it is?
Yeah.
But that's actually hindered me a lot, especially last season. I felt like I could have been performing better and doing better than my ranking, and I just performed terribly. It was really crippling. So I had to step away from the results, and focus more on the performances and actually what sort of squash I was producing, regardless of the result. And that was actually really freeing, and I was able to get much better performances in the second half of the season.
I was impressed. You still do some blogging and writing online, and you write very candidly. We all think that, oh, can I improve my skills? Can I improve my fitness? And then I'm going to be a better squash player. But you were writing about your mental game and how you were working on improving that. how have you gone about doing that?
Well, it's not something I've really spent a lot of time working on over my entire squash career, if I'm being honest. I always focused, like you said, more on the physical side, especially.
Yeah.
And then I realized in the fall when I was losing because of mental reasons, I was stepping on court and I wasn't really sure what I was trying to do. As silly as that sounds, I knew I'd done all this preparation, so I felt confident in that, but I wasn't really sure what sort of player I wanted to impose myself as on the squash court. I did a couple things. I introduced a couple new people to my coaching staff, like Amr Khalifa, who works here at Open Squash.
I love Amr.
So he's been great.
What's Amr's advice been?
Trying to get me to be more aggressive in a way that I would say suits my personality more. A lot of people have told me over the years, you need to be more intense, you need to be mean, you need to, be a bitch. Sorry if I'm not allowed to say that. But that is not what I enjoy about sport. It's not about killing the other person or crushing the other person. I enjoy the competition and the fight, but it's really more about a personal satisfaction than it is about feeling like I'm just better than someone. I'd say working with Amr, he's been helpful to try and help me spin this, for lack of a better word, aggression or this purpose and intent in a more positive way that makes you feel like you're being proactive rather than so defensive, which is how I was feeling.
Do you think it's really important if you want to win a match to have a game plan before you get on court and to execute that plan?
Yeah, I think, definitely. That's something I've been working on a lot more. The funny thing is I think the game plans are sometimes a lot more simple than you might think going in. And in my turnaround match, I'll call it, in January, where I had to let the result go out the window and focus a lot more just on the performance, and thought, okay, well, if I do X, Y, and Z, then that's giving me my best chance of winning.
What was X, Y, and Z? Right? What was X, Y, and Z?
X was be tough to beat, right? Which encompasses a few things, right? If you're going for cheap shots, you're not making yourself tough to beat, right? So it kind of cuts that out. If you're not chasing every ball down and trying hardest to get every ball, you're not making yourself tough to beat, right? Going for a crappy shot off of the serve, not making yourself to beat, right? So it kind of encompasses like a few tactical things, I think, into one. The second thing was just get in front of your opponent, which sounds simple again, but you can visualize that, right? You can visualize it, and it gives you some flexibility as well to think about what sort of shot you need to hit in order to get in front, right? It's not just a rigid, well, like hit the ball at this pace to, get to the back or whatever. And then the third one had to do with picking my opportunities and like being gutsy and trusting myself to take the ball in. If it's there, you take it in, and accept you're going to make a couple of mistakes maybe, but
keep doing it.
You need to do it, yeah. So those were really the three things. And then
that was a big match. I think you won that in 5.
I won that in 5, yeah.
Who were you playing?
I was playing Mariam Matwali, who I'd lost to pretty badly a couple times right before that. And so that was a big turnaround. Yeah.
We need to see that.
Mental things work, yeah. So that was.
I think it's super underestimated how important the mental part of competition is, and especially in squash. As you look forward, so you're going to focus more on the tour, more on the app, more on the you're going to dual goals.
Yeah, definitely both. I think that having something outside of squash is really helpful for perspective. Otherwise, it's a lot about winning and losing, especially when you're traveling, right? So it's nice to have something else that you can turn your attention to. And actually, that's what the commentating has been really helpful with as well. Because after you lose, which let's face it, most of the time you're finishing a tournament on a loss, right? Yeah. Unless you've won the tournament. You could have had a great tournament, got to the quarters.
One of the stats I like to remind everyone about when they're in tournaments and they tell me they've felt bad, I'm like, everyone lost except one.
I know, right? And you just have to kind of remember, like, it's tough. Like, not many people have jobs where it is just winning or losing every day. That's hard. Right. That's just.
Well, look, this has been great, and you know why it's been great? I've got a box match today, and you've just coached me for it.
Excellent. What's your X, Y, and Z game plan?
I think I'm going to use yours.
Oh, great.
I'm just going to use yours.
I mean, it's pretty standard.
Yeah. So far, I'm 0 for 3 in my box. So.
Today could be the turnaround. I might have to come down and coach you through it.
Nicole, thank you so much for your time. Really love it.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you.
You too. Is this a handshake?
Yes,
okay.
It's a handshake.
I wasn't sure if it was going to be a hug.
Next time.
Cut.